Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting. We're going to continue the review, getting ready for our state test. As a reminder, you take a state test at the end of the year. We've talked about so much stuff in this class, and so I'm just going to go through and hit the high points. This is stuff that you're probably going to get questions on, and I just wanted to give you a little bit of a refresher on it before you take the test so you're not going in cold. So today, this is the standard that we're looking at. That might not mean much to you, but your teacher knows what it is, and I'm just going to go ahead and tell you some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. These are those standards that we're going to be looking at. So today we're mostly talking about macromolecules. We need to know what macromolecules are, the structure and function of the different types of macromolecules, as well as talk about enzymes and how they react to their environment. So that's some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today, and without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get into it and get the ball rolling. So again, we're talking about macromolecules. There are four main types of macromolecules. The four macromolecules that you really want to remember are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. A mnemonic device to remember these is just this sentence: clean later, party now. If you can remember that sentence, that might help you remember what the four macromolecules are. So clean later, party now. Who said science couldn't be fun, right? All right, so next I'm going to tell you what you need to know about these different macromolecules. So in general, for each of the different macromolecules, you want to know what the monomers and polymers of each are. You want to know what the structure and function of the macromolecules are, as well as a couple of the examples. So that's what we'll be reviewing here over the next couple of slides. So first of all, I wanted to talk about the monomers and polymers of macromolecules. As a reminder, what are monomers and polymers? Well, monomers are small repeating units, and then the polymer is the big unit, right? And so think of like a brick building. If the whole brick building is the polymer, the individual bricks that make it up would be the monomer. So monomers are small and polymers are large, okay? For carbohydrates, the monomers for carbohydrates are monosaccharides. To me, that one's pretty easy to remember because they have the same prefix. Mono means one, and saccharide means sugar. So what is a monosaccharide? A monosaccharide is one ring of sugar, okay? If you get a lot of monosaccharides together and link them together, you make something known as a polysaccharide. What is a polysaccharide? Well, poly means many, and like I said earlier, saccharide means sugar, so a polysaccharide is the polymer, and it's just many, many rings of sugar, okay? Let's talk about lipids next. So lipids are kind of the outlier here. They're not true polymers, and they don't really have true monomers, although they do have smaller things that make them up. And so for this, like I said, lipids, although there are no true monomers, they are usually composed of glycerol and fatty acids. So if you ever see that, you're probably dealing with a lipid. And a lipid is just a fancy word for fats, okay? Next up, we have proteins. The monomers for proteins are amino acids. So amino acids are these small units, and when you link a lot of amino acids together, you make a polypeptide. A polypeptide is a lot of amino acids that are strung together, and that's the polymer. Once you have a polypeptide, it'll go through several rounds of folding, and once it's folded to the correct shape, then we'll have a protein. Okay, and as a reminder, poly means many, and you can see that polypeptide has that same prefix in it, and polymer has the same prefix in it. So that's pretty easy to remember that polypeptide is the polymer. Okay, lastly, we have nucleic acids. Nucleic acids are made up of nucleotides. So nucleotides are the monomer, and when they get strung together, you'll make either DNA or RNA. And so DNA and RNA here are the polymers. Just as another note, you do need to know what nucleotides are made up of. So nucleotides are made up of a sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. A sugar, a phosphate, and a nitrogen base. Okay, great work. So that is the monomers and polymers. What I wanted to talk about next are the structure and function. So what do these macromolecules do for you? What do they do for your body, right? Well, let's talk about carbohydrates first. So carbohydrates, first of all, they are made up of the elements C, H, and O. So I just tell people to remember CHO. So they're made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and they are often in a 1 to 2 to 1 ratio, which means there's always twice as many hydrogens as there are carbons and oxygens. And that's the same ratio of hydrogens and oxygens that we see in water, right? There's always twice as many hydrogens as there are oxygens in water, okay? Often carbohydrates are depicted as rings, but they can be in the form of chains as well. But if you ever see a ring, that's probably telling you it's a carbohydrate. Lastly, what's the function of carbohydrates? Well, they are the main source of short-term energy for cells and organisms. So this is really where most of your energy is coming from, especially that short-term energy. So you've probably heard of someone having a sugar rush, right? If someone eats a bunch of candy or sugary food, they'll get really hyper immediately afterwards, right? Well, that's because, especially those simple sugars, your body breaks them down and they release a lot of energy really, really quickly. The more complex carbs can give you energy over a longer period of time. People who race, or maybe if you go to baseball or soccer tournaments or just have to run around a lot, you might have heard of something called carbo loading or pasta loading. So the night before a big race, what a runner will often do is eat a lot of pasta the night before a race. And that's because these complex carbs, the starches and the polysaccharides, are more of a long-term energy over like 24-hour period. And so if you eat a lot of carbohydrates the night before a big race, when you get to that race, you got plenty of energy to burn off, right? And so the simple sugars are really quick energy, and carbohydrates, the complex carbohydrates, are more on the span of like 24 hours, okay? Next up, we have lipids. Lipids are also made up of the same elements as carbohydrates, so they're also made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but they are not in that 1 to 2 to 1 ratio. So that's kind of how you can tell the difference, is that the numbers of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen are just all over the place with lipids, okay? Usually, for the lipids, we will see that they are made up of glycerol, and sometimes they can have 2 or 3 fatty acid tails, okay? You might remember those, there's a type of lipid that we've talked about called a phospholipid. Those only have 2 fatty acid tails, and then you can also have a triglyceride that has 3 fatty acid tails. So they're just a little bit different depending on the type of fat that we're looking at. What's the function of lipids? Well, they are storage of long-term energy, so over 24 hours, right? Think of those animals that hibernate or that live in really, really cold environments, like grizzly bears, polar bears, even whales will accumulate a layer of blubber. And the blubber does 2 things. One, lipids are really good for insulation, so they help to keep you warm, right? So that's why polar bears need that layer of blubber to keep them warm. But it also helps them in periods where they can't find food. During periods of famine, they just live off of that blubber. Because this is a good way to store energy long term, they can go a lot longer without eating food if they just have that lipids to burn off, okay? That's great. And then the last thing for lipids is they also help with signaling via hormones. Some of your hormones are lipid-based, and they're mostly dealing with signaling or communicating across the body. And so that's another function of lipids. Okay, what about proteins? Well, proteins are made up of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So CHON, so if you ever see nitrogen, that's telling you that it's not lipids or carbohydrates. It might be a protein though. For these, the structure of them is that you'll often have an R group linked to an amino acid. As a reminder, proteins are the most diverse macromolecule. They have a ton of different jobs. But one very, very important one that I want to discuss right now is that enzymes are made up of proteins. And enzymes have a lot of important jobs. They basically make things happen in your body happen at a quicker rate. What I need you to know about enzymes is that the shape of the enzyme is very, very important. Enzymes are almost like a key, right? If the shape of the key changes, it's not going to be able to do its job right. Because of this, enzymes, they work in particular temperature and pH ranges. If you get too hot or too cold, or if your pH of your body changes too much, your enzymes are going to lose their shape, and if they lose their shape, they're not going to function properly. We call this denaturing an enzyme. We did a lab on this earlier in this year. Go back and find that video if you want to see how how the reaction of enzymes can change depending on temperature and pH. Okay. Lastly, we will talk about nucleic acids. Nucleic acids store and transmit genetic information. So remember, your DNA is made up of nucleic acids. So this is how we are able to pass our genes from one generation to the next. Okay, so nucleic acids, all of these are very, very important. Okay, so what I wanted to do next is go over some examples of these different macromolecules and where you're finding them in your diet. Okay, so first of all, we'll talk about carbohydrates. There's a couple of different types of these. So you have simple carbohydrates. Again, these are the monosaccharides. These are the ones that taste very, very sweet and the ones that would give you that sugar rush, right? Because they're so simple to break down, your body can get energy from them very quickly. One great example of a monosaccharide is glucose. Remember, glucose is the sugar that's made from photosynthesis, and this is what your cells mostly use for energy. We will take glucose and turn it into ATP through cellular respiration. So a lot of the ATP, a lot of the energy in your body comes from glucose. Another type of monosaccharide is fructose. Fructose is the sugar in fruit that makes it taste sweet. To me, that's easy to remember because fructose kind of sounds like fruit, so it's the sugar in fruit, okay? Another type of carbohydrate is disaccharide. A disaccharide is two rings of sugar that are fused together. So they're a little more complex than the monosaccharides. Instead of just one ring, they are two rings. For these, there's two examples. You have sucrose and you have lactose. Lactose might sound familiar. That is the sugar in milk. And some people are lactose intolerant, which means their body does not have the enzyme lactase to break down lactose. One thing I wanted to point out really quickly here is that most of these sugars have the same ending. You'll see almost all of these sugars end in OSE. And so OSE is telling you that whatever you're looking at is a sugar, okay? On the flip side of that, if you ever see a word that ends like this, ACE, it's often a protein or an enzyme, okay? And so what I was just talking about, the enzyme lactase breaks down the sugar lactose. And you can remember which one's which because they have these endings. The OSE is sugar and the ASE is proteins or enzymes, okay? So if you don't know what you're looking at, but it has those last three letters, it's probably a sugar, okay? And then lastly, here are some examples of complex carbohydrates. We might call these starches or polysaccharides, but most people would just call these starches. They are mostly made up of sugar, but they are very complex. And because they're complex, they often don't taste sweet. These would not give you a sugar rush, so you're not going to feel all that energy right away like you did with the simple carbohydrates, but these provide energy over the period of about 24 hours. And so some examples of starches are bread, pasta, rice, and even potatoes are all great examples of complex carbs. These would be good, like I was saying earlier, if you have a race one day, the night before, you want to have some of these foods so that when you get to that race, your body has plenty of energy to burn off. It's kind of like if you were about to travel, if you were about to go out of state and travel somewhere, you would probably fill up your gas tank in your car first, right? That's kind of what's going on here with the carbo loading, is you're filling up your tank so that you got plenty of energy for the next day. Great, let's look at some other examples. So what we're looking at here, these are types of lipids. Okay, and what I really wanted y'all to know about these is that there are two main types. You can have good fats. The good fats are unsaturated. Unsaturated fats are often liquid at room temperature. They are often coming from plants. They will have double bonds, and here are some examples are like peanut, canola, and avocado oil. So think about all of those different oils. They're liquid at room temperature, right? And so because they're liquid at room temperature, that's how you would know that they're unsaturated, and unsaturated is the good type of fat. We want fat in our diet, we just don't want too much of it. And having the good fats is really good. Remember, all of your cell membranes are made up of lipids, so you need lipids in your diet. Here are the bad types of fats down here. Bad fats are called saturated fats. These are often solid at room temperature. They come from animals. There are no double bonds here. And some examples of these are lard and butter, okay? And so those are the two main types of lipids. Have as much of these as you want to. These are the ones that could cause some cardiovascular disease as you get older, okay? They can clog your arteries, okay? Next up, let's talk about proteins. Okay, so what are some examples of proteins? Well, beef, poultry, eggs, pork, beans, fish are all good examples of proteins, all good sources of proteins. Proteins are made up of amino acids. There are 20 types of amino acids. Those 20 amino acids can come together in an innumerable number of ways, and there are thousands, if not millions, of different types of proteins, but they're all made up of the same 20 amino acids. Nutritionally, we can take these 20 amino acids and divide them into two categories. So you can have essential amino acids and non-essential amino acids. I want to go ahead and clear up some confusion. Although they are called essential and non-essential, you need all of these. What the difference in between essential and non-essential is whether your body can make them on their own or not. So with essential amino acids, these are amino acids that your body cannot make on its own, and so it is essential that you obtain them from your diet because your body can't make them. There's about 9 of those. There are 11 non-essential amino acids. Just because they're non-essential, you do need them. But what's going on here is that these are amino acids your body can make on its own and does not necessarily have to be obtained from your diet. Okay? Great work. And then the last one I wanted to talk about are nucleic acids. Okay? Nucleic acids are found in all living things, including the foods that you eat. Remember that every living thing has DNA in its cells, so basically everything has nucleic acids in it. Based on some current research though, meat, fish, seafood, legumes, and mushrooms contain the highest levels of these compounds. So y'all, thank you so much for following along with me today. I wanted to make sure we reviewed those macromolecules because they can be a little complicated and you're definitely going to get some questions about them on your test. Your teacher has some other work for you to do today, so make sure to give that your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.